and, of course, excess government borrowing. That is all that has kept GDP figures up. And indeed, I think we can argue very strongly that on an individual basis, mass migration has made the average Briton poorer. You take a year like 2024, a record level of people coming into the country, and GDP per capita falling. And of course, the productivity problem, well, there's nothing new there. We've been suffering from poor productivity going back for the best part of 20 years. We convinced ourselves that by importing masses of cheap, unskilled foreign labour, that somehow that would be good for our economy. Well, it was good for the wage bills of big companies in the short term, but catastrophic when it came to training and education for our own workforce. And when it comes to the public sector, who still seem to be hooked on the idea that working from home somehow is good for productivity, well, we see the disastrous results, and this is something that Danny Kruger, on our behalf, has started work on already. But the one subject we really don't discuss, at least the Conservative and Labour parties don't discuss, is the level of national debt. In fact, even last week, the leader of the Conservative Party was saying, in office, we cut the deficit for 14 years. Well, cutting the deficit is a very different thing to cutting debt when you're still running borrowing in certainly at peacetime levels, unlike anything ever seen before. They may try to wash their hands and run away from it, but our national debt increased by over 2.5 times during those 14 years. And now it's accelerating. Now it's accelerating in the most extraordinary way. The OBR predictions for the year going back just before the general election was that we'd borrow 77 billion in the year. That estimate is now 130 billion and rising with each and every month. Our debt has risen faster than any other comparable Western country. In fact, in the last 20 years, our debt-GDP ratio is up by nearly 60%. We are doing worse on debt than any of our competitors, and that includes Eurozone countries who are in other deep, deep trouble. Our debt repayments are over 100 billion a year. They're over the level of our defence budget, and the markets are getting nervy. We've seen this with 10 and 30-year gilt yields. In fact, I think my own view is that in 2 budgets' time, the markets will actually force the Chancellor into what will be a genuine austerity budget, at which point the left in the Labour Party won't buy it, and it's why I still stand by my prediction that there will be a general election caused by economic collapse that will happen in 2027. And just look at the pace, the rapid pace that we continue to deindustrialize. It's all going. Chemicals, refining, cement, heavy engineering, steel. We're losing literally all of it. Cars, and China, the beneficiary in almost every single sector. Why? Because for ideological reasons, we have chosen to have the most expensive industrial energy prices in the world. As for benefits, well, the bill this year has ballooned to over 300 billion. That is more than the cost of the National Health Service and defence added up together. So things aren't happening, and work isn't even paying. Our million lowest paid workers would all be better off if they claimed to have mild anxiety. That is the level of mess we're in. One of my own great frustrations is that Brexit has been squandered. The opportunity to sensibly deregulate, the opportunity to become competitive globally, all of that has been squandered. And the worst thing is that regulations and the way regulators behaved with British business is now worse than it was at the time of the Brexit referendum vote, and I apply that with knowledge from everything through the financial services industry to the fishing industry. Now, we believe that the fundamental problem behind so much of this, and yes, of course, there are global trends, yes, of course, these things are factors, but that there is a fundamental problem at the heart of the way this country is run. It's the people that are actually doing it. We're run by a group of human rights lawyers, not entrepreneurs. Virtually nobody on the front bench has ever taken a risk, ever borrowed money, ever set up a business, ever had to meet that monthly or weekly, depending what you do, payroll. There is no understanding at all the disconnect between the conversations in Westminster and, frankly, in much of the media too, and what is happening in the real economy is a gaping chasm. Well, I have to tell you, it's even worse when you think about who runs the departments. Oh, let's put a minister in charge of railways, shall we? They can oversee HS2. They've never worked in railways. They've no knowledge of railways. They haven't got a clue what they're doing. And yet, we managed to have 18 rail ministers in the attitude towards making money, a change of attitude towards success. And I would like to think this would begin in our schools, that we'd have more national champions, that we'd take people who'd come from nothing and become successes and make them heroes, make them role models for younger people to follow. Because believe me, that is very, very badly needed indeed. And perhaps it's appropriate that this speech is being given in this magnificent old banking hall right here in the heart of the City of London. Now, it's a place that I know incredibly well, having spent much of my working life here, and generations of my family before me that worked here. It is a very special place because it symbolizes what is still, despite everything, Britain's biggest. And then we have the banking industry. Not necessarily always been my favorites over the course of the last few years, but they, of course, are forced to implement 4 major European Union money laundering directives, all, of course, put in place with the very, very best of intentions, but that has led to the debanking of hundreds of thousands of individuals and tens of thousands of businesses across this country through no fault of their own, at the same time as the Turkish barbershops proliferate along with the cash car washes right across our country. Our regulators are using sledgehammers to miss the nut. It's just not working. And with the banks not able to act as they should, it's led to the growth of secondary lending, that market exploding, and something which I predict will come back to bite